I walked into that business party with my husband, thinking it was just another normal evening in Seattle. Lights, music, polite smiles, expensive guests everywhere. My husband stood beside his Korean business partner, laughing and talking in Korean. Right in front of me. They thought I didn't understand a single word. They were wrong, because I understood everything. And when I heard my husband say something he was never supposed to say, my whole world didn't just shake. It collapsed in seconds. Where are you listening from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I'm 72 years old. People often look at me and think they know exactly who I am. A grandmother. A retired businesswoman. A quiet old lady who spends her days gardening, baking, and spoiling her granddaughter. Well, people can be very wrong. I live in Seattle, Washington with my husband Richard Wilson. We've been married for 48 years. Together, we built Wilson Property Group from a small family business into one of the most successful real estate companies in the region. We have one son, Daniel Wilson, and one granddaughter, Emily Wilson. For decades, I believed I had a wonderful life. A loving husband. A successful business. A close-knit family. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people admired. The kind of family that seemed to have everything. But sometimes, the biggest secrets are hidden behind the brightest smiles. The story I'm about to tell happened 8 months ago. And it started with a business party. A party that changed my life forever. That Friday afternoon, I was sitting in my home office reviewing a few documents when Richard walked in. He looked unusually cheerful. "Margaret," he said, "get dressed tonight. We've got an important event." I looked up from my desk. "What kind of event?" "Our Korean business partners are flying in from Seoul. We're hosting a dinner party at the Grand Harbor Hotel. This deal is worth millions." I nodded. "Sounds important." "It is." Then he smiled. "And I'd like you there." That surprised me. Over the past few years, Richard had slowly started leaving me out of more and more business matters. At first, I assumed he was trying to help me enjoy retirement. But lately, something felt different. Something felt off. He spent more time away from home. His phone was always locked. And whenever I asked about certain business deals, he quickly changed the subject. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. After nearly 50 years of marriage, you don't automatically assume the worst. At least I didn't. That evening I got ready for the event. I chose a navy blue designer dress and a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. As I stood in front of the mirror, I studied my reflection. The silver hair. The wrinkles. The signs of age. But I also saw something else. Strength. Experience. Wisdom earned through years of overcoming hardship. Life had taught me many lessons. Some wonderful. Some painful. One of the most painful was losing my younger brother, Michael Turner. Michael had died 6 years earlier in what authorities ruled a boating accident. His death shattered me. We had always been close. Even after all those years, I still missed him every day. Around 6:30 that evening, Richard and I arrived at the Grand Harbor Hotel in downtown Seattle. The ballroom looked incredible. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Elegant floral arrangements decorated every table. A jazz band played softly in the background. Business executives, investors, attorneys, and international partners filled the room. The atmosphere was sophisticated and energetic. As hosts, Richard and I spent the first hour greeting guests. Eventually, Richard introduced me to his Korean business partner. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet David Park." David smiled and shook my hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine," I replied. David was polished, confident, the kind of businessman who always seemed 3 steps ahead. What neither David nor Richard knew was that I spoke Korean fluently. Years ago, Michael had started importing products from South Korea. To help him, I learned the language. What began as a business necessity eventually became something I genuinely enjoyed. Over time, I became fluent, but I rarely mentioned it. Most people never expected a 72-year-old grandmother from Seattle to understand Korean. And honestly, I never felt the need to tell them. As the evening continued, guests mingled throughout the ballroom. Servers moved between tables carrying drinks and appetizers. Soft music filled the air. Everything seemed perfectly normal. At one point, I was speaking with a local investor while standing only a few feet away from Richard and David. Neither man paid much attention to me. In fact, they barely glanced in my direction. Then Richard suddenly switched from English to Korean. First, I didn't think much about it. Business partners often prefer speaking their native language. But then I noticed something strange. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't move away. They didn't try to find a private place to talk. Instead, they continued their conversation right there in the middle of the ballroom, only a few feet from me, as if I weren't even there, as if I couldn't possibly understand a word they were saying. Then Richard laughed. A relaxed, confident laugh. The laugh of a man who believed he had absolutely nothing to worry about. And then he said something that instantly caught my attention. In Korean he said, "Don't worry." David nodded. Richard smirked. "My wife doesn't understand Korean." Both men chuckled. Then Richard added, "So she'll never find out about our plan." The smile on my face nearly disappeared. But years in business had taught me how to control my emotions. So I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept pretending everything was normal. Inside, however, my heart was pounding. What plan? What was he talking about? Why was he hiding something from me? I casually adjusted my position so I could hear better without drawing attention. Neither man noticed. Neither man cared. To them, I was simply Richard's elderly wife, a grandmother standing nearby, a woman they believed couldn't understand a single word of Korean. And that mistake was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. I continued listening, and then Richard said something that made my blood run cold. Something so horrifying that for a moment I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Something that would destroy nearly 50 years of trust. At that moment, standing beneath those sparkling chandeliers, surrounded by hundreds of guests, I realized the man I had spent almost half a century loving might be hiding a terrible secret. And what I heard next would change everything. For a moment I stood completely frozen. The laughter, the music, the conversations happening all around me. Everything seemed distant, muffled, as if the entire ballroom had suddenly faded into the background. My eyes remained fixed on Richard and David, my husband, the man I had trusted for nearly 50 years, the man who had stood beside me through life's biggest moments, the man I thought I knew better than anyone. And yet, something inside me was screaming that I didn't know him at all. I forced myself to stay calm. Years of business negotiations had taught me one important lesson. When people reveal their secrets, don't interrupt them. Let them keep talking. I slowly reached into my purse, careful not to attract attention. Then I opened the recording app on my phone. My hands were trembling. My heart was racing. But somehow I managed to press record. I slipped the phone back into my purse with the microphone facing upward. And then I listened. Every word, every sentence, every lie. David glanced around the ballroom before speaking in Korean. "Are you sure Margaret doesn't suspect anything?" Richard laughed. Not nervously, not cautiously, confidently. "Come on." He took a sip of his drink. "She's never understood a word of Korean." The two men shared another laugh. My stomach turned. Then David lowered his voice slightly. "What about Michael?" The moment I heard my brother's name, my entire body went rigid. I felt my pulse hammering inside my ears. For 6 years, hearing Michael's name still hurt. But hearing it come from these two men felt different. Dangerous. Richard looked completely relaxed. "Michael isn't a problem anymore." I nearly stopped breathing. David nodded. "I still can't believe how smoothly everything worked." Richard smirked. "Neither can I." A cold chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt sick. Very sick. David leaned closer. Nobody ever questioned the accident. Richard shook his head. Why would they? Everyone believed it was exactly what we wanted them to believe. My chest tightened. No. No. Please no. I silently begged myself to be misunderstanding. Maybe they were talking about something else. Maybe this wasn't what it sounded like. Then Richard spoke again, and destroyed every hope I had. We spent months planning it. I felt the blood drain from my face. Months. Planning. My brother's death. David nodded slowly. The timing worked perfectly. Richard grinned. Michael trusted me. Every word felt like a knife. That made everything easy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The room suddenly felt too warm. Too small. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run across the ballroom and grab Richard by his collar. I wanted to demand answers. Why? Why would you do this? Michael loved you. Michael trusted you. Michael treated you like family. Instead, I remained silent. Because if I reacted now, the truth would disappear. So I kept listening. David took another drink. At least the properties ended up where we needed them. Richard nodded. Exactly. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. Michael had no wife. No children. David smiled. So everything went to Margaret. Richard raised his glass. Which is exactly what we counted on. My hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. For years I had believed inheriting Michael's properties was simply what he wanted. His will had been clear. Everything had been left to me. I thought it was his final gift. One last act of love from a brother who knew how much I cared for him. Now I was learning that someone else had been thinking about those properties long before Michael died. David looked impressed. Honestly, Richard, it was smart. Richard smirked proudly. Of course it was. Then his smile widened. The properties are legally in Margaret's name. He paused. But after nearly 50 years of marriage, getting control of them won't be difficult. I felt physically ill. David chuckled. So she still has no idea? Richard shook his head. Not a clue. The confidence in his voice made my skin crawl. He truly believed I was nothing more than an old woman he could manipulate. An obstacle. A stepping stone. Not his wife. Not the mother of his son. Not the woman who had helped build his success. Just another asset to control. David lowered his voice. And once you transfer everything? Richard smiled. I'll finally have complete ownership. The two men clinked their glasses together. Celebrating. Celebrating my brother's death. Celebrating their plan. Celebrating the future they thought they had secured. I couldn't listen anymore. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand there for another second. Without drawing attention to myself, I turned and walked away. Every step felt heavier than the last. I made my way through the ballroom, past the guests, past the music, past the smiling faces, until I reached the women's restroom. The moment the door closed behind me, I broke. Completely. I grabbed the edge of the sink. My legs felt weak. Tears poured down my face. For several minutes I couldn't stop crying. The pain was unbearable. Not just because of Michael, but because of Richard. The betrayal. The lies. The decades of deception. The man I had trusted with my entire life had been standing in that ballroom joking about my brother's death. I looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was ruined. My eyes were red. My hands were shaking. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Part of me wanted to believe there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Then I remembered something. The recording. I pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. Richard's voice filled the restroom. Clear. Undeniable. Every horrifying word had been captured. Every confession. Every detail. Every lie. And suddenly something changed inside me. The tears stopped. The fear faded. The heartbreak remained. But something stronger began replacing it. Determination. Richard thought I was weak. He thought I was clueless. He thought I would never discover the truth. He was wrong. Very wrong. I wiped my eyes, fixed my makeup, straightened my dress. Then I looked directly into the mirror. For the first time that night, I wasn't seeing a heartbroken wife. I was seeing a businesswoman, a sister, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who was about to fight back. And as I picked up my phone, I made a decision that would change the rest of Richard Wilson's life. The next call I was about to make would bring everything crashing down. I stood in front of the restroom mirror for several seconds. The woman staring back at me looked different. Just minutes earlier, I had been a devastated wife trying to process a betrayal so horrible that it didn't feel real. Now, I was angry. Not the kind of anger that makes people scream. Not the kind that makes people lose control. The dangerous kind. The calm kind. The kind that waits. The kind that plans. I took a deep breath and looked down at my phone. The recording was still there. Every confession. Every lie. Every horrifying word. Richard and David had handed me evidence with their own mouths, and they didn't even realize it. Part of me wanted to storm back into the ballroom. Part of me wanted to grab Richard by the collar and demand answers. But emotions solve nothing. Evidence changes everything. And I intended to make sure my brother finally got justice. I stepped out of the restroom and walked down a quiet hallway near the hotel's conference rooms. The music from the ballroom sounded distant. For the first time all night I was alone. I immediately dialed 911. My heart pounded as the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Margaret Wilson. I glanced around the hallway. I'm at the Grand Harbor Hotel in Seattle. How can I help you, ma'am? I took a deep breath. I have an audio recording of two men discussing a homicide that was ruled an accident 6 years ago. There was a brief pause. Then the operator's voice became serious. Can you repeat that, ma'am? I carefully explained everything. The conversation. The recording. The names. The references to my brother Michael Turner. I even explained that one of the men involved was my husband. Even saying those words felt unreal. My husband. Possible murderer. The operator listened carefully. Then she informed me that officers and detectives were being dispatched immediately. She instructed me not to confront anyone, not to reveal what I knew, and not to leave the hotel. I agreed. When the call ended, I stared at my phone. Everything was changing. There was no turning back. Next, I opened my email. There was one person I trusted completely. Robert Hayes, our family attorney for nearly 20 years. If something happened tonight, Robert needed this evidence. Immediately, I attached the recording. Then I typed a short message. Robert, listen to this recording immediately. It concerns Michael Turner's death. Contact me as soon as possible. I hit send. A moment later, the email disappeared from my outbox. Good. The recording now existed somewhere besides my phone. That gave me some peace of mind. Then I made the hardest call of the night. I called my son, Daniel Wilson. The phone rang twice. Dad's big party keeping you busy, he answered jokingly. Hearing his voice almost broke me again. For a moment I couldn't speak. Mom. His tone immediately changed. Mom, what's wrong? I swallowed hard. Daniel, I need you to listen carefully. The concern in his voice grew. What's happening? I need you to come to the Grand Harbor Hotel. Right now. Yes. There was a long pause. Mom, you're scaring me. I glanced toward the ballroom entrance, then lowered my voice. I can't explain everything yet. Is Dad okay? Daniel asked. The question caught me off guard. Of course he would assume something had happened to Richard. After all, Richard was here with me. I took a breath. Your father is physically fine. Then what's going on? I closed my eyes for a moment. How was I supposed to tell my son that his father might be connected to the death of the uncle he loved? Finally I spoke. Daniel. It's about Uncle Michael. Silence. Complete silence. Then I heard him take a slow breath. What about Uncle Michael? My voice trembled. I think we've been lied to about what happened 6 years ago. Another long silence followed. What do you mean? I can't explain over the phone. Mom. Please. Just come to the hotel. A few seconds passed. Then his voice became firm. I'm leaving right now. Come alone. I will. And Daniel. Yeah. Whatever happens tonight, remember that I love you. His voice softened. I love you too, Mom. The call ended. I stared at the dark screen for several moments. My family would never be the same after tonight. Daniel's life was about to change forever. Emily's life would change too. And mine certainly would. But the truth deserved to come out. No matter how painful it was. I slipped my phone into my purse, straightened my necklace, adjusted my dress, and walked back toward the ballroom. The moment I entered, nobody suspected a thing. The jazz band was still playing. Guests were laughing. Servers carried trays of expensive drinks through the crowd. Everything looked exactly the same, even though my entire world had changed. Across the room I spotted Richard. He was standing beside David Park. Both men were smiling, laughing, celebrating, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. Richard noticed me and waved. The sight nearly made me sick. Still, I smiled back. The same warm smile I had given him thousands of times over the years. His shoulders visibly relaxed. Good. Let him feel comfortable. Let him think I knew nothing. When I reached them, Richard casually placed a hand on my shoulder. Everything okay? I looked directly into his eyes. The eyes of a man I no longer recognized. Then I smiled. Everything's fine. Richard grinned. Good. David nodded politely. Neither man suspected a thing. In fact, over the next 30 minutes they became even more confident. Even more careless. Richard joked with investors. David discussed future projects. The two men toasted to their success several times. Watching them celebrate made my stomach turn. They truly believed they had gotten away with everything. My brother's death. The lies. The betrayal. All of it. But arrogance has a way of making people careless. And careless people make mistakes. I spent the next half hour pretending to mingle with guests. Smiling. Making conversation. Acting as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I kept watching the ballroom entrance. Waiting. Every minute felt longer than the last. Then my phone vibrated. A text message. Daniel. I'm 5 minutes away. I quietly slipped the phone back into my purse. 5 minutes. Just 5 more minutes. Across the ballroom, Richard raised his glass during another toast. Guests applauded. David stood proudly beside him. Neither man had any idea what was coming. Neither man knew detectives were already on their way. Neither man knew the recording had been secured. Neither man knew their perfect night was about to become a disaster. The moment I saw the officers enter the Grand Harbor Hotel lobby, my entire body went still. Just minutes earlier, the ballroom had been full of music, laughter, and celebration. Now everything felt different. Heavier. Colder. Like the air itself was holding its breath. Richard stood in the center of the ballroom with David Park, still smiling and greeting guests as if he owned the world. He had no idea his life was seconds away from collapsing. Then the ballroom doors opened fully. Uniformed officers entered first. Behind them were 2 homicide detectives. Detective Sarah Mitchell led the team forward. Everything stopped instantly. The music cut off. Servers froze mid-step. Guests turned their heads. Confusion spread across the room. Richard noticed first. His smile faded. David leaned in. What is going on? He whispered. I stayed near the side of the ballroom. Watching. Waiting. Detective Mitchell raised her badge. Seattle Police Department. Everyone please remain calm. Silence fell across the entire room. Phones started rising. Recording. The detective continued. We are here regarding an active homicide investigation involving Michael Turner. The moment my brother's name was spoken, The entire ballroom changed. Whispers erupted instantly. Some guests looked shocked, others confused, but Richard went completely still. The color drained from his face. David's expression tightened immediately. Detective Mitchell continued firmly. Michael Turner's death, previously ruled an accident, has been officially reopened based on new evidence. Richard suddenly stepped forward. This is ridiculous. There must be a mistake. Detective Mitchell looked at him directly. Richard Wilson? Yes. We need to speak with you. Richard let out a short, nervous laugh. For what exactly? The detective didn't hesitate. You already know. David shifted behind him, visibly uneasy now. Richard tried to regain control. This is a misunderstanding. My wife can explain everything. Every head in the ballroom turned toward me. I stepped forward slowly. The room was completely silent now. Detective Mitchell asked, Mrs. Wilson, did you contact us? I did. A wave of shock spread through the guests. Richard stared at me, disbelief in his eyes. You called them, he said quietly. Yes. His voice cracked. About what? I met his gaze. About what you said in Korean. Silence again. Then he whispered. You understood us? I replied calmly. Yes. Every word. Gasps filled the ballroom. David stepped back slightly. Richard froze. Detective Mitchell continued. The recording provided by Mrs. Wilson has already been reviewed during the investigation. Richard tried to interrupt immediately. That recording means nothing. The detective stayed completely calm. We also used certified translation assistants to confirm its contents. That was all she needed to say. No repetition. No explanation. Just certainty. Richard's confidence cracked further. Then Detective Mitchell nodded toward another officer. A secure device was brought forward. This is part of the official investigation review, she clarified. It is not being played for the entire ballroom. The recording was briefly played and verified privately by the detectives. Only Richard, David, and the investigative team could hear it clearly. Not the guests. Just enough to confirm every word. When it stopped, silence returned heavier than before. Richard swallowed hard. David's hands were shaking now. Richard tried again. You're taking it out of context. No response. I was joking. Still nothing. Then David suddenly snapped. No. His voice echoed across the ballroom. Everyone turned toward him. He pointed directly at Richard. This was never a joke. Richard's eyes widened. David, you planned everything. Shock spread through the guests. David was shaking, completely breaking now. You said Michael had to be removed. Richard stepped forward quickly. Stop talking. But it was too late. You said there was no other way. Guests began backing away. Phones recorded everything. Richard's carefully built life was collapsing in real time. Detective Mitchell stepped in. That is enough. She turned toward the crowd. Based on verified evidence, both individuals are now considered suspects in an active homicide investigation. The room erupted in shock. Then she looked at Richard. Richard Wilson, you are under arrest. An officer stepped forward, then turned to David. David Park, you are also under arrest. Handcuffs clicked. That sound alone changed everything. Richard looked around wildly. At the guests. At me. At his collapsing world. At the life he thought he controlled. And then, his eyes found Daniel. Daniel was already inside the ballroom. He had been there since the police announcement. He had seen everything. He had heard every word. He stood completely still near the back of the room, his face pale, his hands clenched. His voice finally broke through the silence. Mom! I turned toward him. He looked at Richard, then back at me. Is this real? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was already standing in front of him. Richard was being escorted forward in handcuffs. David too. And Daniel just kept shaking his head slowly. No, no. As Richard passed him, he stopped for a second. For the first time, his voice wasn't arrogant. It was quiet, almost broken. Daniel. But Daniel stepped back, not saying a word. That silence hit harder than any shouting. Officers continued escorting Richard and David out. The ballroom remained frozen. The ballroom never truly recovered from that moment. Even after Richard Wilson and David Park were taken away in handcuffs, nobody moved for several seconds. It was as if the world itself was still trying to understand what it had just witnessed. The music was gone. The celebration was gone. And in its place was silence. Heavy silence. The kind that sits inside your chest and refuses to leave. I stood there near the center of the ballroom, still feeling the weight of everything that had just collapsed in front of me. 48 years of marriage. A lifetime of trust. All of it reduced to a single truth that could no longer be hidden. Daniel slowly walked toward me from the back of the room. His face was pale. His voice barely came out. Mom! I turned to him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because there are moments in life when words don't know where to go anymore. He looked toward the doors where Richard had just been taken, then back at me. Was it really him? He asked quietly. I nodded once. Yes. That one word felt heavier than anything I had ever said in my life. Later that night, Daniel came home with me. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. The city lights passed quietly outside the window like nothing had happened at all. But inside us, everything had changed. Weeks later, the official investigation confirmed everything. The recording, David Park's confession, and financial evidence left no doubt. Michael Turner's death was not an accident. It was planned and carried out by people who believed they would never face consequences. But they were wrong. In the weeks that followed, everything moved through the courts. Wilson Property Group collapsed under investigation. Assets were frozen. Financial records were seized. Every hidden transaction was exposed. Richard Wilson was found guilty of conspiracy, financial fraud, and involvement in a planned homicide. David Park was also found guilty, but received a reduced sentence due to full cooperation with authorities. Then came the final judgment. Richard Wilson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. David Park was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with eligibility for early release after cooperation review. No appeals changed the outcome. No arguments saved them. Justice was final. That evening, Daniel came to my house alone. He sat across from me in the living room, holding a cup of coffee he never touched. Mom, he said slowly, what do we do now? I looked at him for a long moment. This was the part no one prepares you for. Not the betrayal. Not the truth. But what comes after. I don't know everything yet, I admitted. Then I added, but I know one thing. He looked up. We don't let this destroy us too. Then my voice dropped lower. And for the first time, all the pain I had been holding finally came out in words. What hurt me the most? I looked at him. Was that for some money and some properties? He killed my brother. A heavy silence filled the room. Daniel lowered his head. He couldn't answer. Neither could I. Later that night, Emily came home. She ran into the house like she always did, unaware of the full weight of everything that had happened. She didn't ask questions. She just came and sat beside me and held my hand. Weeks later, I stood by the window in my home in Seattle, the same home I had lived in for decades, but it no longer felt like the same life. Daniel stood beside me. Emily was asleep upstairs. The house was finally quiet again, but this time not in fear, in peace. Daniel broke the silence. Do you regret anything? I thought about it for a long time. Not the marriage, not the years, but the blindness, the trust without questions. Yes, I said finally. I regret not seeing the truth sooner. A pause. Then I looked at him. But I don't regret finding it. I turned back toward the window. Seattle lights stretched across the night sky like a reminder that the world keeps moving forward, no matter what breaks inside it. And then I said the words that closed everything I had lived through. I lost a husband. But I didn't lose myself. A long silence followed. Then I added softly, and sometimes, that's the only kind of justice that really lasts. If life taught me anything, it's this. Never trust time more than truth. Money and power can change even the closest people. And the deepest betrayal often comes from the ones you trust the most. So always watch actions, not words. Because in the end, truth always comes out, even if it takes years. Thank you for watching my story. If this touched your heart, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Your support means a lot.